Hey, Jason Rogers here, and recently I've been getting a lot of questions about how I would go about starting the acquisitional process, aka how I would go about starting a business and growing that business by making acquisitions if I had to start from scratch again. Actually, this is a timely video for me to shoot because today is November 29th of 2019, and I actually started reaching out to board members to build my team in late November of 2018. So it's been just a year ago since I started my business, and I want to say in retrospect how I would do things differently if I had to start now in 2019 with the experiences that I already have, right? So I have the experiences that I now know, but I need to restart, right? And so what would I do? First of all, I would pick a service-based business that was SBA pre-approved as the sector I was going to make acquisitions in. That would be the first big change, or really the first big step I would take is, okay, I need to pick a sector that is service-based or a business that otherwise trades at normally between 2 to 4 times EBITDA, 2 to 4 times earnings, and I would make sure that that sector was SBA approved. That would be the first step, right? To pick my investment thesis, I would pick a sector that was SBA approved, that traded at 2 to 4 times earnings. That would probably be a service-based business, but I'd be a little less concerned about whether or not it was a service-based business and a little bit more concerned that it traded at 2 to 4 times earnings and that it was SBA approved and that the sector looked to have a promising future, right? So that would be the first place to start. I would not go into real estate again, though. I'm very happy to be in there now, but you asked me how I would go about things now if I was starting from scratch. And the candid truth is I would pick, again, a sector SBA approved, 2 to 4 times earnings with promising growth potential. That would be the first step. Next, I would build a board, just like I did and just like I talk about here on YouTube. I would build a board with industry experts, with finance experts, with an accountant, with a lawyer, and with industry experts and with a chairman. I think I said all of the positions there I would build for a board. So I'd build a board. I would then, a little bit different than what I did with my business, I would use the lawyer on my board to help me do the legal and to work with me on a success fee basis to get my first deal done. So as opposed to going out and chasing law firms and doing that whole thing and getting them to write me an engagement letter for a success fee basis, I would use the lawyer on my board to be the lawyer to help me get through my first deal. And then after I got my first deal done, then I would procure a top law firm. Depending on my sector, I may do the same thing for accounting. But that is dependent on my sector. And I can't definitively say whether or not I would actually procure a top accounting firm or if I would use the accountant on my board to help me with the accounting functionalities, because I don't know what sector I would ultimately choose. I know it would be a service-based business or a business where I could buy it at 2 to 4 times earnings. I know it would be SBA approved, but I don't know what sector. And the reason that I can't say definitively whether or not I would choose to use my accountant on my board for the accounting functions to get our first deal done, or if I'd use an accounting firm, is because it depends on whether or not I would need an accounting firm to do an audit, and it depends on how complicated the sector I would pick would be. If it was a complicated sector, then I would use an accounting firm and get the accounting firm to work with us on a success fee basis, whereas if it was a more simple sector, then I would use the accountant on my board and have him or her help me analyze the financials of the businesses we were looking at. And then same thing, I would use that accountant on a success fee basis. Next, once I had my board, well, first of all, once I had the industry I was going to consolidate and the investment thesis associated, meaning we're going to buy distressed businesses and grow them to their best, or we're going to buy, optimized businesses within this sector, right? Once I picked my sector and really my investment thesis, once I built my board, once I procured legal and accounting support in the ways I just discussed here in this video, then I would go on a mad hunt for deals. Cold calling. I would cold call, and I would only cold call. I would not waste my time with brokers. I would not waste my time, other than about a week of homework on LoopNet or Crexi or businessesforsale.com. I would go on those websites for about a week so that I could understand what the businesses in my sector were buying and selling for, what the going rate was. But once I understood the going rate, then I would completely ignore that stuff. I would not actually look on those websites to really find a deal. I would only use those websites to understand what the standard price for the businesses in my sector that I was trying to buy were, and then I would go on a mad cold calling hunt. Where would I procure leads? Either just simply using Google, or I may buy a leads list for $500 if I felt like it was a credible leads list. A leads list is just a list of business names and contact information and phone numbers and names, etc. in a given area, state, province, what have you. I would call. I would try to identify what sellers seem motivated versus what sellers didn't seem motivated. And the simplest test I would use to figure out if a seller was motivated is, will they send me their financials? If I tell them, look, I'm so-and-so, I'm the principal of XYZ business, I'm interested in your business, I want to buy your business, please send me over the financials. If they do so, I would take that as a good indicator that they are indeed interested to sell. Whereas if they do not send over the financials for whatever reason or reasons, I would just go on to the next one. Once I had the financials of about 15 to 20 different businesses, I would then go and meet each of those owners in person and analyze the businesses in person. Now let me back up a little bit. I would only call businesses that were in my local area within, say, a 2 to 5 hour drive, if possible. And then if I had to expand to maybe an 8-hour drive, I would expand to an 8. And then if I had to expand to maybe a 12-hour drive, then I would expand to a 12-hour drive. At the 12-hour drive point, you fly, probably, as opposed to drive. But the point is, I would start very local and then expand outward. I would do the same thing with board member candidates. I would do the same thing with any and all professional services, whether that's accounting, legal, what have you. Start local, and then if you have to expand out, do so, but start from your hub and only expand out as far as you have to. In retrospect, I would not build a board that comprised of individuals in New York and Florida and San Francisco and Southern California and Chicago. That's what I did with Brighter Living. Now I have incredible people on my team, so I'm not regretting that I built the team that I built, but in retrospect, I would have gone about it geographically from a different frame of mind. Same thing with acquisition targets. Okay, so now I have a list of, say, 15 different acquisition targets that I'm really interested in. I would go meet all of the acquisition targets that looked interesting on paper. All right, if it didn't look good on paper, or if the acquisition target didn't seem to be interesting to myself and to the board that I had built, then I wouldn't go meet the owner. But if it looked interesting, then I would go meet those owners, and from there, I would start negotiating purchase prices. I would try to negotiate with as many different owners as humanly possible. Why? Because if you're negotiating with 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 or 10 different owners, and 4 or 5 or 6 of the owners fall out of the negotiation, no problem. I still have a handful left. Whereas if I only negotiate with one owner and that negotiation falls through, now I'm the one holding the bag, and not in a good way, right? So I would negotiate with every single owner I possibly could. I would go for the lowest purchase price possible. And once negotiations really started picking up with several owners, I would really zone in on the 1 or 2 or 3 different owners that seemed to have the best chance of doing a deal. And I would keep narrowing things down until ultimately I struck incredible terms with an owner that I really liked. If seller finance was on the table in more than 80% leverage kind of a way, where in other words, the seller would finance 80 or more percent of the transaction, I would really take a keener focus on that deal. But I would also be skeptical. Why is this owner so willing to finance the sale? Is it because this business is a dud? And I would really be heavy on the due diligence during this phase. I would be turning over rocks like crazy. I would be having my board help me in any way possible. I would just be an animal on the due diligence phase. And then once I selected a deal that I liked and we negotiated a purchase price, assuming seller finance was not in the deal, I would then go on a cold calling blitzkrieg, just a blitzkrieg, calling every single bank in the area. I would zone in on particular on banks that had SBA financing capacities, and that would be one of the first questions I asked them. Does your bank engage in the SBA program? If the answer was no, I would put them on a secondary list, but not as my primary targets. I would really double down on all banks that had the SBA financing component. And then based on the banks that did have the SBA financing component, I would try to get the SBA / the bank to go 80 to 90% of the leverage, and I would try to get the seller finance to count as the last 10 or 20% as a seller carryback second position note, basically forming the equity. I would try to get that seller carryback note to not need to get paid out until we paid off the bank note, aka the SBA note, in full, right? So the second position carry is basically completely pushed out and won't be paid back until we pay off the bank note in full. I would convey to the seller, look, let's just say it's $1 million deal. Look, Mr. Seller, I'm gonna get you $800,000 in cash upon closing, but you're gonna have to hold on tight for a couple of years for me to get you the other $200,000 because I gotta pay off the bank note first. If it's a motivated seller, they'll probably do it. If it's not a motivated seller, then that's why you have a whole bunch of different sellers that you're talking to, because you cold called sellers for a month like an animal. You just locked yourself in a room and made calls for 10 hours or 15 hours every day. At this point now, you've hopefully procured the finance using a combination of seller finance, SBA finance, maybe a little bit of private equity. Maybe you have to fundraise 50 or 100 or 200 grand of private investor capital, or maybe you have your own capital you're willing to use in the deal, depending on how you want to roll. I would close. I would stay relentlessly focused on the end result. Just relentlessly focused on the end result. Closing the deal. A good deal with good terms, and stay focused to the day the deal closes. There are so many terms to negotiate when you're coming down to the wire, whether it's the amortization schedule or the interest rate or the specific terms if there's a seller carryback associated, and what are you getting when you purchase the business? Are you also getting the different contracts, and are you getting either the furniture or the equipment or the inventory? You need to stay hyper focused throughout the negotiation process. It's not over until the quote unquote fat lady sings. Once you close the deal, I would go out and I would get a beer and I would celebrate because you've done a hell of a thing. Or at least that's what I would do.
Hey, it's Jason Rogers. Thank you so much for watching the video. Be sure to subscribe, thumbs up the video, and for more, go to jasonpaulrogers.com.